Today's lecture will be about verbal and nonverbal communication. See this picture and try to guess what's the difference between verbal and nonverbal communication. Here in this picture you see two people are speaking to each other. One is speaking, one is listening. What about the second part of this picture? Two persons are shaking hands. So, what's the difference between verbal and nonverbal communication? First, what's a communication in general? It's simply the act of transferring information from one place to another, from one person to another, okay? From one person to another, from one place to another, from a sender to speaker or to receiver. Verbal communication. Verbal communication is a type of communication that you use words to do it, whatever it's written or spoken. Here, when I'm telling you a message in an oral form, it's a verbal communication. It's a form of verbal communication. Also, when I write you an email or I write you a message or telegram or any type of written form, that's verbal communication also. Communication takes place through face-to-face conversations, group discussions, counseling, interview, radio, television, calls, memos, letters, reports, notes, email. So every form, whatever it is, spoken or written, you use words, it's considered verbal communication. About what do you think it may be? It's transferring information without using words. You use no words while communicating, while transferring information. So what are your materials now? What are your instruments to communicate, to transfer your information? Maybe body language, maybe gestures, how we dress or act, even our scent may be considered one of non-verbal communication. Verbal communication, we speak only with our mouths, but we communicate with our whole bodies. So try to think the power of non-verbal communication. Take care of this. Nonverbal communication may be defined as a communication between the sender and the receiver, when both physically present at a place use the means rather than language or spoken word to convey their feelings and thoughts. Yes, we imagine two persons are speaking to each other without using any words. Try to practice this with your friend. Universal facial expressions. All of us know those expressions. The first one is for happiness, secondly for sadness, and then anger and fear. This emoji. Yeah, all of us use those emoji in our messages in WhatsApp or in Messenger. Yes, let's see. All of us use those. Let's see this graph. In our communication, just 35% of our communication will be verbal. And oh, look at this percentage, 65% of our communication is non-verbal. facial expressions, tone of voice, movement, appearance, eye contact, gestures, posture, all those. Yes, 65% of our communication is considered nonverbal. Yeah, let's see the power of nonverbal communication. Very powerful. Take care of this. Visualizations. What about the tools or instruments of visualizations, graphs and charts, maps, logos, and other visualizations can communicate messages. So the teacher use all those parts, all those instruments to support his or her communication in the class. Let's explain communication, the elements of communication. We have 6 elements of communication. We have sender, receiver, the message itself, channel of communication, environment of communication, and distractors. Look at those: sender, receiver, message, channel, environment, and distractors. Encoding. Let's see some terms like encoding, like decoding, okay, like the message we'll speak about. Encoding. It's conveying the information into a form that's appropriate to the communication channel. Encoding اللي هو التشفير. The receiver then decodes the message. Decodes يفك الشفرة. So encoding, when you convey the information into a form that's appropriate to the communication channel, you are encoding it. The receiver will do, he will decode, هينفك الشفرة, the message to understand its meaning and significance. Effective communication involves minimizing potential misunderstanding and overcoming any barriers to communication of each stage in the communication process. An effective communicator. What are the characteristics of effective communications? Understand their audience well, choose an appropriate communication channel, hand their message to this channel and encode the message to reduce misunderstanding by the receiver. Seek out feedback from the receiver as to how the message is understood and attempt to correct any misunderstanding. So, while being at your classroom, you should ask your students, do you understand me? Do you see? Yes, if you have any question, please don't hesitate to tell me, to ask me any questions. Receivers can use techniques such as clarification and reflection as effective ways to ensure communication. You should ask your students different times many questions to check that they decode your message, that they understand what you mentioned to them. Communication channels. Communication channel is a term given to the way in which we communicate. Multiple communication channels available to us. Face-to-face conversations, it's a channel. Telephone calls, also channels. Text messages is a channel. Email, the internet, including social media, Facebook, Twitter, radio and television, written letters, brochures, reports. Okay, all those are classified as channels of communication. So you should choose an appropriate communication channel for effective communication, as each communication channel has different strengths and weaknesses. For example, broadcasting news of an upcoming event via a written letter may convey the message clearly to one or two individuals, but will not be a time or cost-effective way to broadcast the message to a large number of people. Okay? If it's oral, it will be better for a large number of people. Okay? Now, all of you know what's communication, what the difference between verbal and nonverbal communication, what are the main elements of communication, what are the different channels of communication, and what are the features or the characteristics of effective communication. Okay, that's all for today. Thanks for listening. See you next lecture. Goodbye.